since we've done one of these.
Yeah. I hope we have some new topics. I was thinking back to the last few topics we did, and it was all about the Olympics and all about COVID. And I think we do have some of that, but not exclusively. So hopefully we'll mix and match a little bit better this time.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm getting. I'm very glad that we have. I mean, COVID unfortunately still is part of life, but yeah, I'm kind of glad to be moving past the Olympics at this point.
Yeah, yeah. It's Paralympics has just finished, and the
Right.
vaccinations seem to be increasing.
Yep.
Maybe one item that I could talk about at first is about how the vaccination rollout was really slow. I found that really interesting. But before that, let's just mention about our giveaway today. Very
Yes.
exciting.
The awesome. I
We
mean, the currently the most in demand thing for all people who love all things Japan. The most hot item on the internet right now. These. I mean, it's just. I mean, how could you not want
Yeah, right? And I thought
the
of all
Family
the
Mart
things
socks?
to get right in there with the trend. It's something useful. Hopefully you can use for a long time. So if
These
you
are
are
really comfortable.
interested,
I'm
yeah,
wearing them
and
right now. I mean, these are high quality. These are surprisingly. I mean, like everyone's saying, you put them on, they are surprisingly. Oh, these are nice. You know, I mean,
right?
they're very simple. They're very simple item, but they are great. And it's
Yeah.
getting
Now
to be that
you
time of year in the northern hemisphere that you need socks,
Yeah,
no more
and
sandals.
you had a funny story how you ended up buying yours. And I do as well because I was taking my daughter to school and she said, "Oh no, I forgot my socks." And it was raining really hard, and so I pulled over to the convenience store, and so I had to go in and get her some socks. It happened to be Family Mart, and I
Yeah,
thought, well, why not get socks for myself? It was a bit chilly that day, so I ended up getting a pair. And like you, I was very impressed. They're very comfortable, good
yeah,
socks.
good
And then
socks. I mean,
on your last news stream last Sunday, a lot of your people engaging were asking about them outside Japan. And we can get them in Japan, but maybe difficult outside. So I thought, what a good giveaway.
yeah. Well, for all the people who love Japan and wish they were here or whatever, for something that's relatively simple, and easy to get, but you have to be somewhere where there's a Japanese Family Mart. Yeah, I could understand for the people who are pining for Japan. It's a hot item, so we're happy to help meet that demand. I mean, so the thing for me was it was actually much more straightforward, just straight up peer pressure. I just started noticing on Instagram and on Twitter people who I follow one by one were saying that they'd caved in and bought a peer, and I just started to feel the pressure. And I must admit, um, I walked up to my local Family Mart and I checked, do they have them? And they did. And I was like, okay, they've got them. I'm not going to buy them. I'm going to go home. And then I saw more posts about more people getting them. And then I thought, then someone said that I had to go to the convenience store for something else. And I realized, okay, you know what? I have to buy something else anyway. I'm going to get some ramen and some socks. So, yeah, it was pretty straightforward.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, it looks like Jude from YouTube has joined and said, "Hi from Canada. We always need socks here. Lol." All right, Jude, you are the first person. I'm going to write your name on this piece of paper and you have a chance to win later. So if
Yeah.
anybody wants to enter our socks giveaway, just write a comment about socks and we'll put you in the giveaway. How's that sound?
I think it sounds like a good deal.
Yeah, a podcast focusing on these socks. See,
Yep.
it's something that everybody wants.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's better than focusing on expensive whiskey or there are things like cars and first class travel. There are various, I've lately I've gotten into watching YouTube channels about like first class air travel, but I think socks are a good level for something that's easy to participate in.
All right.
Uh,
We've got Mitchell says he's in. So Mitchell Atlas, you are also
yeah,
on. And anybody who wins, you're just gonna have to DM me later, and I will send it to you, no matter where you are. How's that? All right.
sounds like
Sounds
a good
good.
deal.
Before we start, I just wanted to give a shout out to the Bobby Judo and Ollie Horn at Japan by River Cruise. They did a great episode today with Selena Hoy
Mm,
about World Suicide Prevention Day. It's a very serious topic, but there is an organization in Japan called TEL, to Tokyo English Lifeline, and they do a fantastic service, multilingual, multicultural online counseling, which is anonymous for anyone who wants to talk. And they're doing a fundraiser from today, which is World Suicide Prevention Day, until the 10th of October. So definitely have a look on their website, sign up to do 21,081 steps sometime within this month. And that number is significant because that's the number of people that took their life last year.
Wow.
So it's should be zero, right? It's something that we should all be thinking about and supporting people to talk about and try to find help. It's a mental health is a really important issue, especially now during COVID, right?
Yeah, no, indeed. I mean, it's famous as a big problem in Japan to begin with, but yeah, there's this thing for particularly the service that Tel provides. Japan is exciting, but you go people who come to Japan. One, there's this roller coaster that people go through of experiencing the place, and it is a roller coaster without a safety net, and really without a roller coaster at times. It can suddenly be very, very tough, and definitely there's a lot of people who struggle, and you're away from your family and your friends that you grew up with, and they've got the language barrier and everything else, so it makes small problems bigger for people, and it's nice to know that there are services out there that are accessible that can help with this sort of thing. So yeah, no, great by Bobby Judo, focusing on that on the podcast today.
Yeah, really good. Great to hear about that today. Richard Howerton, thank you. You are in the draw. Magic Straw Maker, you are in the draw. Thank you very much. Anybody else who wants a pair of socks and wants to enter the giveaway, just write something about socks in the comments and I'll put you in.
Yep.
All right. So we talked about World Suicide Prevention Day. Definitely check out TEL, Tokyo English Lifeline, and listen to Japan by River Cruise podcast if you want to hear more of that discussion.
Yeah.
What should we start with? Oh, Hiko, you had a great tweet about the vaccination period being limited or minimalized from 2 weeks down to 10 days. That's good news.
You mean the quarantine period?
Quarantine period, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So my understanding of this, and I'm guilty of skimming headlines and sharing, but yeah, my understanding is that for business travelers at the moment, so it's a really small limited group. But right now, if you're a business traveler and you get exceptional permission to come into Japan, you are required to stay in your hotel or your home. They don't have dedicated like quarantine hotels like they do in some other countries, but you're required to like stick to your destination for 14 days. And this is for Japanese people as well as foreign visitors. In fact, I think it's nearly entirely actually applying to Japanese travelers right now. People coming back into the country, they have to self-isolate at home for 14 days. They are now saying that if you have recognized vaccinations, which really are only vaccinations used in developed countries like Moderna, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, they're not recognizing Sinovac or Sputnik or those sorts of vaccines. But yeah, if you have those, you get 4 days less on the quarantine period. It's a baby step, but it's a clear baby step in the direction towards just loosening the controls, and I think gradually, hopefully, sort of starting to open up more ways to get into Japan. But yeah, I less for 4 days saved on having to stay at home is a very small thing, but hopefully it's a step towards people who have been waiting all of this time to get into Japan. It's a small step towards slowly letting more people in.
Yeah, and it's of course the Japan travel ban is connected, but for people who can get back into the country, anybody who has to travel right now or is traveling for vacation, it is very difficult and very expensive. Even if you're allowed back in, you have to jump over so many hurdles. What was
Mhm.
Tokyo Tronic was talking about? He knows a few people who had to pay an excess of 150,000 yen, so that's
Wow.
like $1,500 on top of all your ticket and everything, just to do the testing and all the requirements of staying in a hotel, or extra, you need a special taxi or rent a car or something. So there's a lot of added expense if you're going to travel right now. It's
Yeah.
not something I would wish. Of course, some people don't have a choice. They have to go
Yeah.
abroad for whatever reason, right?
And I think right now it is really limited to business travel. I mean, you hear about sports players, and I think some bands were let in for some concerts recently and so on. So you hear about these exceptions that outrage everybody, but it's, yeah, basically business people who are Japanese business people who are based abroad wanting to come home. And for them, yeah, staying at home for 14 days is probably, doable. But really, for traveling to Japan as a foreigner, it's still pretty much impossible. But yeah, I'm
Unless you're in the
optimistic that
Olympics.
that's where I'm coming to. Yeah, that part of that was, that the Olympics were trying to maintain capacity for the 100,000 plus visitors associated with the Olympics who are coming in, and immigration was just overwhelmed focusing on that. So now that those people have mostly, I think, gone, the hope is they'll start converting that capacity into capacity to start welcoming foreigners, and they're clearly still setting everything up. But this is a sign that they're going to start recognizing something like a vaccine passport, that they'll perhaps allow entry if you're appropriately vaccinated and you've got proof, and they'll set up a quarantine. But again, this is Japan. It'll happen slowly. I don't think it's really going to happen until next year, but I think you
Yeah.
can start to see them sort of creaking the door open for small groups, probably starting with business travelers, and hopefully moving towards students and working visa people who have been waiting for 18 months, more than 18 months now. Hopefully
Yeah.
those people will start to get avenues into Japan in the next few months.
Definitely. Louise, you have been entered into the sucks draw. Thank you for your sucks comment there. Magic Strawmaker, you had a great question. Is there any talk on a travel bubble that Japan can have with an Asian country? Now, this happened between New Zealand and Australia for a while. I don't know
Briefly.
if they're still doing it now.
Yeah, just
Um,
like a week after they set it up, it kind of fell
yeah.
apart. Cases started popping up. I
And then
think Singapore it
Hawaii,
might happen.
Hawaii said that they would accept Japanese travelers without a vaccination period, but they quickly stopped that as well. So I think the travel bubbles, it's really difficult until we get vaccinations up to a higher percentage, maybe.
Yeah, I think right now, I mean, Singapore is probably got the best shot at it, and they're being very strict with how they're locking down and trying to control it. But there again, it has to be mutual as well. And this is the thing: someone's always doing better than the other person. It's really rare that both are doing well at the same time, and they're both confident enough to share the borders. But again, I can sort of imagine progress around this. It's something I think Japan has said, yeah, we won't consider travel bubbles with anyone except like New Zealand and Australia. And then New Zealand, Australia turned around and said, no way we'd. They look at Japan, look at all the cases you got. No way we'd do that. So, it's always the person who's doing better is kind of like not looking well at the others. But yeah, I think the hope is once you get a lot of countries with something like 80, 90% vaccinated and so on, and cases are down, or at least serious cases are down, that sort of thing should become possible, and that sort of thing should start to be again, I think, happening hopefully at the start of next year. So
Yeah.
we'll see. I'm optimistic. I mean, it has
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, I'm showing this article now from Kyoto Journal,
Mm.
talking about when Japan is going to open up, and everyone's just kind of guessing right now. What's your estimate? I'm thinking spring next year. It might open up for travelers. It might open up for students again before the spring semester starts after the break. I don't think it's going to open up any sooner. I kind of hope it would, but I don't think so.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's all guessing, but I think it'll be whatever it is, it'll be staggered. And so I think they'll go for, high priority, small, manageable groups first. So it'll be things like, business trips, and so on, I think first. And then what will they do after? I think that probably, working visas and residents should be prioritized over students and tourists. I think the sequence would probably, and by volume as well. Although I'm not sure if actually which would be the smaller group, students or visas, but I imagine whichever is the smaller, they'd probably. But you know what? There's so many people, again, working visas who are basically those are a form of residence visas. I mean, so are
Yeah,
student visas. But who do you let in first? I don't think they'll have the capacity to do it all at once, but I think you're right. I think it'll be through. Probably there'll be limited travel starting at the around the end of the year for business travelers and so on. And I
yeah,
imagine all going well, January, February, they'll keep opening it up. But I can't imagine tourism happening even in the first half of next year. But hopefully, yeah, we could be in a position that students can come in, vaccinated students, can
yes.
come in with a quarantine period. Hopefully, yeah, the first half of next year sometime. I
Yeah,
think spring is realistic. Yeah,
that's something that I don't think is happening yet in Japan. There are no mandates about vaccinations yet in Japan. Like you're seeing in America, certain companies are saying everybody has to be vaccinated, or certain industries are doing it, certain airlines, but not in Japan yet. Once that starts happening, once we have enough vaccine, that's the first hurdle.
Yeah.
That might happen, and then the vaccination rates would go up as well, right? Somebody's
Yeah.
asking, what is the giveaway? It is these wonderful, very useful Family Mart socks. So Family Mart socks, very, very convenient. Yes. And if
Yeah.
you want to
The hot
win,
item
just
at the
write
moment.
socks anywhere in your comment or question, and you will be entered for the draw at the end. Okay. Sorry, you were saying?
Yeah, yeah. So Japan has this thing where, for the same reason Japan can't have a lockdown, there is a pretty much a consensus that you can't have mandates. You can't force people. It's all very quasi. There's like, you really, really should wear a mask and you really, really should be vaccinated, but they're not going to arrest anybody. Like in Australia and New Zealand, police will arrest people not wearing masks and so on, or traveling more than 5 kilometers from their home. Japan, that's unimaginable, and that's because Japan has a pretty dark history with fascism that, is sealed off in the constitution, so they won't go anywhere near that anymore. No one wants to even test it. What the government is saying, though, right now is when they announced yesterday that how they would lift the state of emergencies that are on like 19 prefectures at the moment. They announced that there will be, right now, you can get a big A4 size paper vaccine passport, proof of your vaccination status in Japan, but they're going to prepare a digital version of that, which you can have on a
A4
mobile phone in
size?
December. It's A4 size.
That, that's
So
so
yeah,
big.
it's
Yeah.
enormous. It's enormous. It's pretty hard. It's pretty uncool to have to unfold it and to flash it
Yeah.
at people. But it will be on a mobile phone in December. And what the government is suggesting is, rather than making it mandatory, they're going to make it more like a privilege. They're going to continue the ban on, for example, izakayas, serving alcohol, except to people with proof of vaccination. So it's kind of flipping it around. Rather than making
Yeah.
it mandatory to have a
Having
vaccine
a
to get into a bar,
carrot instead of a stick,
yeah,
right?
it'll be a privilege. It'll be privileges for vaccinated people as an incentive. So I think, which I like, actually.
Yeah.
Again, it's very tempting to get into "you must do as I say,"
No, no.
and a
I
lot of
think
people demand it,
often the
but
carrot works better. Yeah.
yeah. But I can see. But so, they're talking about kind of, yes, the other way around, but certainly using vaccination status as a way to open up movie theaters, karaoke, bars, and certainly I think it'll be used for travel and stuff like that. So as a condition for, as a precondition for being able to more loosely, end the restrictions. So that makes good sense to me.
Yeah.
And it is something as well. I've worked with Japanese sort of policymakers for a long time, and they are slow and they take too long, but they are very thorough and they really do research what's going on in other countries and what's working and not working.
Yeah.
They can always be criticized. They're not necessarily very innovative a lot of the time, and they take a lot of time. But I think these ideas are being well thought through, and they're being based on what's working in other places. So yeah, yeah. Again, it'll take time. It'll be too slow, but it'll happen.
Yeah. Abel says from YouTube, I live in Yokosuka. I've not seen anyone without a mask since March. And me too. I don't see anyone out without a mask. And I hear my American family is saying, people are being more lax now. A lot of people walking without masks. In Hawaii, almost everybody is wearing a mask. We have very similar culture to Japan, maybe, that people
Mm.
were wearing it anyway during flu season and stuff. The whole vaccine rollout in Japan being slower, the recent news that came out about why Japan's vaccine rollout was slower, because they insisted on domestic trials, even though they did have 100 Japanese nationals in the American trials. They decided to redo it in Japan. And did you hear the reason why they did that, Hiko?
Yeah, the biological differences based on race, which when
No,
I
no,
first heard,
no. They said it was because of diet.
oh yeah, yeah. Well,
Because the diet would be different in Japan.
I
And
mean,
then Rachel Kopp and I were saying, how do they know the Japanese in America weren't eating a more traditional Japanese diet than the Japanese in Japan? I mean, how do they know, right? Exactly what people are eating.
yeah. And again, I have a tendency to be more, it's okay, isn't it, kind of in my reaction. And to the extent that it was understandably urgently pushed through, but to the extent that Japan was like, hey, let's just make extra sure it's safe. to me, I thought was kind of like, I can hold on for, 1 or 2 more months if that's what it takes. And remember, it wasn't just the testing, it was also this, there was a supply issue. They just didn't get them until after Europe and America had taken their lot. And Japan was like first in line of the countries not producing the vaccines. We got them ahead of Australia and New Zealand and the other countries that also are in the same position. Um, but yeah,
It's
but at the same time, I must admit this thing about the need to test. You're right. The diet thing is silly, and I didn't realize that there were Japan nationals in the US. But I was originally scoffing at the idea that, oh, they need to test, like somehow Japanese are biologically different to the rest of humanity. I was scoffing at that, but then some people who actually do this, like for a living, who actually do run these trials, were responding to me on Twitter and saying, "Oh, no, 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 it's actually a thing." And there is this huge problem with in the US. There's a problem that drug trials are overwhelmingly done on white men, and minorities and women are not tested. And it turns out that there are medicines which have very different impacts on women sometimes, and and those side effects are dismissed, because but they weren't factored in. And apparently there are biological variations, and there is justification for that, which surprised me. But yeah, the diet thing, yeah, that's a little bit much. But look, making sure it's safe, I'm okay. I'm glad,
making sure it's safe is fine, but there
yeah,
were, there was a lot of concern. There were people that died during that time. So that's a real judgment call to delay
yeah,
it that way. And it was a real shock that it was because of diet. That was a bit shocking. But the vaccine czar, of course, is in the news because
running for
he
PM.
may be the next leader of Japan,
Yeah,
Taro Kono, right? Should we talk
yeah,
about the leadership race? That's big
certainly.
news.
Yeah, actually, I mean, it's so horrible. It's so Japan. Well, for a start, including that thing we talked about just now, no policies get decided. Almost zero, like less than 5% actually get decided by lawmakers in Japan. There's a big faceless bureaucracy that has tenure for life. They never change, even if the government changes, and they decide everything. So honestly, it's just a bit of theater what happens in the politics and the elections. Honestly, but it is extra depressing when you find out that we're going to have a national election in November, but yet the most influential election, honestly, just the way the polls are going, it seems like the most influential election in Japan is going to be the internal party election of the LDP, which no one can vote in. And it's going to be the lawmakers and local chapter members deciding out of these three candidates. And I admit myself, I find the candidates and everything kind of interesting. And I think maybe more interesting. Honestly, the opposition has trouble. I don't know why they fail so badly to make themselves interesting. This is super interesting, even though nobody really can vote. It's like everyone's treating this like it's a real election when it's really it's like a Rotary Club vote. But yeah, it is super. It is an interesting time.
So, what do we know about these three candidates? I was reading, of course, Taro Kono is touted as the social media guy, that he's very good at social media. Is that true?
Well, it's a pretty low bar, I think, that he's starting from. Um, yeah,
but
I
but
mean,
he was in charge of the vaccine rollout. Now the vaccine rollout is going very well. Over 58% of the Japan population is now vaccinated with the second dose. Is that right?
yeah, I
So
think so. I
it's
mean, they're going at a steady 1.2 million doses a day. Yeah, yeah, it's going pretty well right now.
so
By my
he seems to be the favorite, maybe on the back of that vaccine rollout success.
not
Do you
just
think?
that. Um, so in a way, there was this funny thing. He's always been this kind of perceived rival for Suga, and you felt like Suga was giving him roles deliberately that people are highly likely to fail in, and he was kind of like annoying everyone by not doing badly at them. So he was the foreign minister, and he was kind of doing quite well at that. And so they moved him into administrative reform, like the hardest job in government, telling the bureaucrats what to do. And he did this big campaign that got a lot of attention about telling everyone to stop using faxes and hankos. And the rage that he inspired from the bureaucracy is still coming out in the media. They talk about he's a bully and whatever. But the idea of a politician controlling the government is just outrageous to the Japanese bureaucracy, and he really did do that. And again, so then that was working, and he was getting a lot of positive attention that he was forcing the government to stop ridiculous paperwork processes. So they put him in charge of the vaccine rollout, which either he does it well and Suga looks good, or he does it badly and then he's less of a rival to Suga. So it looked like a win-win. But and he came in late. He came in after the he wasn't in charge of the pandemic response. He was just put in charge of the vaccine distribution, and this was kind of at a point where Japan didn't have any vaccines in the beginning, and we're starting from late and from zero. But yeah, he's come in, and it appears. I mean, you can always complain. You can always say it should have been faster, should have been better, and nothing's ever perfect. But I'd say right now, it does look like the whole country is on track. That
Yeah.
everyone who wants to be vaccinated will be vaccinated by 11, so by November. So yeah, he seems to have done again with this. He's just a very activist, energetic person who seems to be quite good at hustling to get things done. By the way,
And
his
he's
dad is
he's
really interesting.
the youngest of the three, who are the favored
Was
candidates.
he the
He's
youngest?
50, 54, 58.
Yeah.
Kishida is 65. Takaichi is late 50s. I think she's a little bit older than Kono-san, but of course, we
Okay.
don't want to talk about a woman's age, but we always do in Japan, no matter what, right?
Well, that's a form of
Now,
equality. The one thing about Kono as well, though, his dad is really famous for the Kono statement. One of the very few times, so his dad was not in the well. I don't know the full story of his dad, but his dad was a socialist prime minister who actually did this huge he's the guy who acknowledged the comfort women issue and gave the first acknowledgement and apology for it to Korea. So also, I mean, a lot of these people come from these dynasties, but the Kono name is actually attached to his dad in a really liberal, sort of famous socialist way. So kind of interesting that he's a rising LDP star, as the son. I don't know what they talk about over dinner, but
yeah.
yeah, really interesting.
Yeah, I read a few articles about that and saying that he is much more conservative than his dad,
Oh
but
yeah,
having that legacy is very interesting.
yeah.
Now, speaking of socialism, one of Kishida's policies is very kind of socialist leaning. He talks about wanting to decrease the wage gap or the poverty wealth gap, and to fund more social equity programs like daycare and education and childcare allowance and that kind of thing,
Mm.
which wouldn't be a bad thing. There's a lot we've seen during COVID, a lot more women than men have insecure incomes because they're on temporary contracts, especially working mothers, increase in suicide rates, even for more women than men. So it doesn't sound bad in terms of sustainability. I was happy to see that. I don't know if he's serious about following through. That seems different from the party line, but we'll see.
Yeah, yeah. So again, I kind of so Kishida is just a straight, wanting the job, in a faction, and seems like a nice enough guy, and whatever. But the thing that frustrates me about all Japanese politics, including domestic and in the election, but in this case within the party, when you ask for their policies, their policy is heartful feeling for one another, or whatever. There's no policy, and it's always been a Japanese government. Pro,
Sorry, my cat really likes politics. She
oh, I
really
can
wants to.
tell. You have
Yeah,
good
yeah.
taste. No, so one thing about Japan, I mean, like for a country that's been run by a right wing party for basically 70 years, it's not really a right wing party the way that you'd think about right wing parties in most other Western countries. Um, it's always been a goal, like for example, since the whole, I think they realized after the war that there was such inequality, and there was an aristocracy in Japan at the end of the war that was dismantled, and there were these landowners and these basically sort of almost serf level people, and the government actually set about redistributing land. They have this huge inheritance tax that was used to sort of redistribute wealth in the society in a really aggressive way. Basically, the wealthier you were, you would lose everything, and you'd have to pay in tax 70% of the value of all the assets that you had at the time that you died, which would bankrupt all of these rich families, and that would go into taxes that would be spent on public works projects to give jobs to regular folk. And the result of that is, this was done under the LDP. Japan has, you take the top 10% and the bottom 10% of Japanese incomes, the wealth gap in Japan is among the lowest in developed countries. It's like 4 times. And this has been a consistent both goal of the bureaucracy and of the LDP. And the idea is that by having social stability and not having a huge wealth gap, it'll promote contentment and re-electing of the and letting the government do other things. So it's always been. It doesn't sound very right wing or conservative, but in Japan it is conservative to want to promote social stability through addressing wealth inequality, and they do that in all sorts of ways. So it's not inconsistent, but to the extent that, but in the end of the day, he's just setting a theme for what he wants to emphasize in terms of policies. But most of these policies, things like promoting, daycare and stuff like that, these are things that quietly bureaucrats have been working away on and have been, consistent policy things anyway. And there's been quiet improvement in these areas when these things were really highlighted as a big problem about 6 or 7 years ago. I mean,
Yeah.
the daycare issue was partly what brought down the LDP when they got voted out and the Democrats came in, was dissatisfaction over that. And, it's the bureaucracy that reacts to that. So he's kind of setting these platitudinal sort of themes, but honestly, they're kind of being done anyway. It's just a matter of
Yeah.
emphasis and
Well,
tone, and it's a nice
that's very
tone. But,
clever politics, isn't it? You see that all over the world. I really want to do this, and then quiet behind the scenes, it's already happening, and they can take credit for
take
that.
credit, absolutely.
Very clever.
And look, it
Now,
will mean that
I
more
don't
money will go
know.
into those things, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know hardly anything about Takaichi-san. Do you? It seems like
Yeah,
she
I wish I
follows the
didn't.
party line. She, supporter of Abe's policies. That's pretty much any candidate here. They
Yeah.
follow Abe's policies, right?
So yeah, I'm not as all out against her as a lot of people in the Gaijin Twitter world are. There are photos of her with neo Nazis, but honestly, neo Nazis can walk into a politician's office and take a photo, and and just for a photo, I'm not going to brand her on that sort of thing. But that said, and also let's acknowledge Japan, I think the symbolism and desperate need. Japan 122nd on the global gender equality ranking scale, which doesn't include every country. I think it only includes like 170 countries, but pretty far down the list. So the symbolism of finally having a woman prime minister, and from a party that has less than 10% women among representatives in parliament. I mean, the lowest women female representation rate in parliament of any party is in the LDP. So the idea that one of those very, very few women could get into the top role, and the party's been deliberately trying to develop. Clearly, they've been placing women in cabinet to position them to be able to, go for the prime minister role. So I think for all of those things, and look, Takaichi, particularly as she's received that extra responsibility and she's been put in charge of the Ministry of General Affairs, one of the biggest and most important ministries, she's mellowed out a lot. She's become a voice for LGBT, I think, equality issues. And she's been a voice for women, sort of again the daycare issue and so on, which she really wasn't before. And I think there is this pressure when you're in a party like the LDP, as a woman, to sort of try to outdo the men a little bit and try not to be too balanced. And she's come around on that, as has Seiko Noda, who might also be another candidate. But
Yeah, I read
before
that Noda-san might also be a candidate, but it sounds like it's kind of narrowed down to these three
Abe
recently.
endorsing Takaichi is really going to make her one of the main candidates, and some polls actually have her ahead of everybody. Um,
Wow.
but the thing about
But
her,
it's absolutely like you said, even to be one of the top three candidates as a female, it's just nice to see that happen
it's
in
progress,
Japanese politics. Yeah, it's
and it's also
progress.
strategic. Even if she doesn't have a go this time, say that Kono gets in and he's a disaster, everyone's going to say, "Oh, we should have voted for Takaichi." It's going to position her great for the next run in any case. So just having a good showing, I think, is going to actually really boost and endorse her position. The only thing about Takaichi is just as a person, forgetting the wonderful symbolism of a woman finally getting into this position, which is great. She really was, really far right and nationalist and aggressive and like anti-foreigner and kind of she aligned herself with a lot of pretty I considered Fruit Loop far right. I mean, she was on the fringe. She was like the Tea Party, let's have a war with China, fringe of the LDP for a long time. And she was the one that often would get wheeled out to represent the likely that as prime minister she would go to Yasukuni and she wouldn't mind the outrage that would cause. So um, she has, setting aside whether that's a good thing or not or whatever. But the point is, I mean, I think she's certainly mellowed out a lot. But just to be clear, we shouldn't just look at her gender when we look at this. She is, she's gotten to where she is being a very, very far right, within this group. She has never been mainstream until now, although she's kind of moved into the center more recently. I think she's become more palatable, but she used to be in the news all the time for the wrong reasons, like up until about 10 years ago.
Yeah. And
So
I
yeah,
think public opinion matters, right? Like what people are demonstrating against, what groups are rallying against, what people talk to the government as what do you call it, lobbyists. That does work in Japan, like other countries. it maybe is not as effective as you'd hope, but hopefully people who do seem quite extreme and radical, they can be swayed by public opinion. So like
Absolutely.
you said, she's mellowed a lot in her policies. So hopefully whoever is elected into power will listen to the public and look at what public need actually is and make policies that work for the environment and society. That's always the hope, right?
And good news about that as well. Right now, the Suga cabinet is a 70, some polls show them at 70% disapproval rating. Yeah, one of the least popular governments of all time, and they're 2 months, 3 months out from a national election. So what's happened is normally the big kingpins within the party, the heads of the factions, honestly, they decide, hey, I'm going to get all my vote, all my block to vote for so and so, and they can do that. But right now, all the young LDP members are so afraid that if they back the wrong candidate, they back a candidate that's not popular, they're gonna lose their seats, effectively lose their jobs, and so they're all lobbying within their factions to not be, forced to vote along with the factions. So yeah, even within the LDP, that kind of people are so aware of the risk that the LDP is going to lose a lot of seats in the next election. They're really forcing them. They're really trying to force the leadership to make sure that they do pay attention to what voters want, and that they choose a prime minister that's going to be acceptable in an election. So it's also a good sign perhaps that even in this non-election election, people are actually really they're afraid enough about being held accountable that they are actually, yeah, they're actually really paying attention to what voters want right now. So it's a good sign.
Yeah, and under Suga's leadership, he did make the aim for 2050 to be carbon neutral for Japan. He did
Yeah.
make aims for 2030, which have already been met. So he did make progress in terms of sustainability targets and goals, which Japan has been moving forward. So that's good, and hopefully whoever follows him will continue the progress and not take a step back.
Yeah, and I think these are, like I said before, these are things that the bureaucracy was already on is on it's like a train on rails going towards anyway. They're doing these things anyway, and the politicians just get to take the credit for it. But at the same time, the reason Shinjiro Koizumi made a huge performance out of sort of crying at the news that he was resigning was he said that, listen, the signing up to these sort of international agreements and making these sort of big political commitments to supporting environmental policies, which was his ministry, were things that other prime ministers might not have done, and he felt very, very appreciative. So I think it is, he deserves some credit, I think, for being particularly supportive of environmental initiatives. Even though, and I hope that a change in prime minister won't affect that. But yeah, I think you can give him some credit. Certainly, there's continued to be slow, but meaningful progress.
Yeah. I think what it matters, right? It matters what policymakers are doing, what policymakers are talking about, aiming towards. That matters in terms of the public perception of sustainability, or what the companies are doing as well, how the companies are being pushed. Now, you had interesting tech news from Toyota. Do you want to talk
Yeah,
about that?
sure. So yeah, no, Toyota announced the other day that they are basically I mean, they've been slow, obviously, committing to pivoting towards EVs, and they've got a huge. I mean, basically, all of their suppliers for all of their internal combustion engine cars are basically the whole economy of IG and a lot of like places in America, like Alabama and some states where they have plants, and they're having a lot of they're being very disrupted by companies like Tesla that don't have those supply chains to start with, and they've asked for extra time to convert over, and as a result, Toyota's been seen as anti-EV, and they're trying to respond to that because obviously there's such a flow towards that. So yeah, they did a big announcement that they are doing really huge investments in EV battery and car technologies, as well as previously announcing that they're going to be start launching from next year, I think, like a ton of pure EV battery powered
Wasn't
cars.
it 15 that they
Yeah,
said we're going to have 15 different types of EV? That's a huge shift from their, we're not doing EVs, we're only going to do hydrogen. Hydrogen is the way of the future, or hybrids. And then all
I
of a
don't think it was
sudden,
ever
we're
that
going
they're
to
only doing
do
hydrogen. Yeah,
100% EV electric cars, and that was a big change. But weren't they kind of part of the pushback? Was it 2030 or
yeah.
2020,
They said it was.
25?
They said
No
2030 was too
more.
soon.
No
and
more
they
cars without hybrid or electric or zero
yeah.
emissions, right?
So hydrogen, they've just got like one demo car. They're not proposing, I think, to make any
The
more than that
Mirai.
at the moment. They're
Hmm.
proving the technology. But what I think they wanted was to be able to. There was this concern that with all of this hype going towards EVs, that they were going to lose all the cred that they were getting on these environmental sort of targets for their hybrid cars, which they need to kind of keep making in a way because of their commitments to suppliers and so on. So being told to go cold turkey on hybrids by 2030, what they wanted, I think, was extension to keep making hybrids a little bit longer and getting credit for that, and to not go all EV before that. And there's this irony because they've been making hybrid cars, which have batteries and electric motors, for longer than most. They
Yeah,
actually have a
no,
ton of patents. They have a ton
that's
of great
huge.
battery technology. It's just that they're not ready to switch over that fast, and they're asking
Yeah.
for more time. And that's caused them a little bit unfairly, I think, to be portrayed as anti-EV, but clearly they've gotten the message and they are scrambling.
Yeah. I mean, the effect that the Prius has had on the
Oh,
world car markets, being the pioneer in, lessening emissions of standard cars ages ago. They
yeah.
deserve a lot of credit for that. So they are doing a lot of good things for sustainability. And it's actually leads very perfectly into my next topic about
Mm,
the company's perception. How do Japanese consumers think about different companies in terms of how ethical or how good these companies are in terms of taking care of the environment or helping society? And Toyota is at the very, very top. Toyota, followed by Google, Apple, Uniqlo, Eon, Amazon, Suntory, Nissan, Muji, and then it goes down the list, and then
yeah.
Patagonia is quite low down. So I think this is a very interesting result.
Hmm. It is. I guess well, it's partly a sign of the way that they do their marketing. Um, as I mentioned to you before the show, one thing I used to do in one of my previous lives was I worked in one of these big catering companies, drafting their annual corporate social responsibility reports, which included a mix of environmental and corporate social responsibility. And lately, for investors, it's one of these things that companies, when you want to attract investors, you've got to put out a CSR report, a corporate social responsibility report, showcasing how socially aware you are. Like it's one of the ways that a lot of now investment firms assess that, the investability of companies. So a lot of companies have done a lot to drum up, the sort of green initiatives that they're doing and appeal that way. And I guess that shows that those sort of efforts are going across well in Japan. I'm not really sure how Suntory or Apple are necessarily environmental like leading environmental companies, but obviously they've been very good at getting their message across that what they are doing is making a difference. It's very
Well,
interesting that it came out that way.
it kind of reminds me of why I became a consultant to help the smaller businesses
Mm,
use what they are doing, which is good, as a part of their branding, because the big companies are very good at talking about the tiny, maybe small thing that they're doing, but they talk
yeah,
about it as if it's a core part of everything they do. So
sure.
the perception of a lot of big companies in Japan is they are more sustainable, I would say, than they actually are.
Mm,
This was a very interesting study by a company in Tokyo called Fabric, originally from London. James Hollow was interviewed on Japan Times under the
mm,
sustainability section that they have now. They
mm,
interviewed 5,300 people between 18 and 65, and they wanted to find out, what does sustainability mean to Japanese customers, and to what extent do they care? And they
yeah.
had some very interesting results. 77% want to make an effort to reduce, reuse, repair, recycle, but 67% don't know how, are very frustrated.
Mm,
They also found almost 70% thought that SDG targets and sustainability was completely separate and unrelated. So there's just a real lack of awareness, I think, in the Japanese public, much different from, I would. I haven't compared data. I would love to,
yeah.
with other countries, but that seems to coincide with the impressions that I get when I talk to people about
Mm.
their impressions of sustainability, how do they choose products. But yeah, a lot of really interesting results here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess when you talk with Japanese people, there. I mean, on the one hand, there are aspects of Japanese culture, like two things that jump to mind are the whole sort of mottanai thing, the idea of being sort of minimalist and so on. In the first place, a lot of paradoxes around that, of course. But there's that thing there, and I guess a lot of Japanese might equate sustainability to just being tidy. And then you've got the other thing where uh, um, oh, I've dropped the thought for a moment. Oh, hate that.
Um,
So wait a
so,
minute.
yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go
So
ahead.
okay, so another part of the results. Somebody just mentioned. Abel says she watched their presentation on Temple University's Japan's YouTube channel a few weeks ago. They were just published in Japan Times, so this is kind of a new research that's just become available.
Yeah.
Really interesting. The lowest
Sorry.
engagement with sustainability. So people who don't really think about sustainability at all in their day to day was most people, 65%.
Yeah.
37%, oh, sorry, I said a higher number before. 37% do not equate sustainability with SDG issues, which of course is very related, but most people are very unaware. What do SDGs actually mean, right?
Yeah.
The most shocking thing for me from the results was let me just get through this and then I'll let you comment, Hiko. Sorry.
Yeah.
So they had, of the most engaged people, the people who are really trying to be sustainable in their day to day, was only 4% of all the people they talked to.
Yeah.
And 5% of all the people they talked to were highly negative about sustainability and felt strong aversion to trying anything sustainable. So the
Wow.
highly negative group was actually higher than the highly engaged group, which is really sad, but there's a lot of room to grow.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, look. So sorry, the thought came back to me. I just blinked out
Okay,
for a
good.
moment. One, there's another paradox, which is that there's this huge sort of social pressure, this group behavior. So this idea that you're supposed to separate your garbage and have recyclables out on a certain day, even though, most of the recyclables are still sent to the incinerator in most wards in Japan. They just go through the motion, and to the extent and brutally, right? There's nothing more brutal in Japanese culture than the social pressure around separation of garbage, right? Um, but it's almost like it's ritualized, right? It's not even connected actually to the end goal. And frankly, again, like the fact that every train station in Japan has separate sort of recycling bins where you put in your cans here and your bottles here, but they all go into the same thing because it's all put there for the day that they're able to actually process them. So people go through and actually rigidly socially enforce the rituals of doing things, probably not even really thinking about what it's for, just doing it and then being sort of rules. But at the same time, another thing about Japan is that it has, I think, the lowest in OECD countries, among the lowest participation rates in volunteer groups and so on, which in countries like New Zealand and Australia, very high rate. I mean, the highest Greenpeace membership rate in the world, I think, is still New Zealand. It's very common that when people want to join NGOs and volunteer groups, it's very commonly environments and sustainability rated. So I think it's related. So I think it's common, it's connected that in Japan, the lack of volunteerism is also connected to sort of apathy, I think, about that sort of thing. Like the information is not that would normally in other countries be shared through those groups really isn't. People just watch their variety shows on TV. And I guess I could maybe understand the negativity, at least to the perspective that it's a major source of stress, like the garbage separation and stuff like that. So the idea of having to do more than that, or when it comes up in the news that the environment minister says that we can't have plastic forks with our bentos anymore, we have to pay for, what, the paying 2 yen for the plastic bags at convenience stores, a big initiative that Suga supported, that that Koizumi wanted to do. Um, as has happened everywhere around the world that it's been rolled out, of course, people just hate it and complain about it. And maybe it generates a little bit of a negative and a kind of a bit of a nannying perception, but it's a worthwhile thing. But again, you only have the superficial level of engagement because there's just this societal level. If you get them to follow it as a ritual or as a societal rule, it'll work. But people just, are not engaged in these other ways. And yeah, plenty of room to grow. But yeah,
And
really surprising that it came out that
I
way.
think what we saw with the Japan plastic bag ban and then the charging at convenience stores was very positive, right? We saw that a lot of people, of course, complain in the beginning and
Yeah,
then accept it and adopt it, and it becomes the norm and they get used to it. So
yeah.
that it just shows it's another example that we need that top down policy for the better, as well as people making an effort from the bottom, but we also need companies to be engaged. And I think this goes back to the idea, why is all the pressure and all the responsibility put on the end user, put on the
Well,
consumer? Why not the company that's selling you the package that you can't recycle? Right. So a
right.
lot of movement is happening right now in America. Some states are making the companies take responsibility for what happens to their packaging after use, right? And so there is positive change happening around the world in
Mm.
terms of this. I interviewed someone from TerraCycle Loop. They're just launching the reusable packaging system with Eon Mall now in Japan. So there is more ideas about reusable packaging and less single-use packaging. So the awareness is happening, but it needs to come from the top, from policy. It needs to come from companies, and then people get used to it, right?
It's starting slowly, but there are some great documentaries around increasing numbers of them going around. I think it's been known for a long time, but it's now getting really mainstream, understood that honestly, the recycling fad. And during the 80s, when I was a kid, there was this huge, like really positive, recycling fad that was promoted by Coca-Cola and by all the sort of big drinks companies and so on. And it's now people have looked back at it and they recognize, oh, that was a scam. That was the drinks companies afraid of being forced to do something and suddenly running this very successful, probably one of the most successful PR campaigns ever of flipping it around and selling it as a sort of positive social responsibility that still is so ingrained. I mean, this is where people are still fighting over garbage separation in Japan over the results of this campaign in the 80s by Coke. But it was really all connected to them, not wanting to have to increase their costs by changing their packaging or having to collect the containers or improve their behavior. And everyone bought into it, and it still really, really shapes. It's really hard to undo. The idea of being against recycling or saying that it's sort of cynical, it's really hard, right? I mean, the whole idea that the
Yeah.
triangle, the 4 R's, and recycling is like the last thing. You're supposed to
Well,
not
it's
get to that point, and yet that became
recycling is
everybody
such a
feels
big
better
lie that everybody still believes in Japan, that
everywhere.
less than 20% of all those pep bottles are actually recycled. But even at the Olympics, they
No.
made a big deal about the podiums being from recycled plastic. You see different products in the supermarket and it says recycled plastic or recycled paper, but it doesn't say how much,
Mm.
because a very small percentage is actually recycled, and the recycle process has more pollution as a part of the recycle process. So we know it's so much better to reuse, but that mentality that recycling is good and
Mm.
everybody doing that majime, really good sorting of all the trash and doing it so well, and then it's not as much meaning as they
Well,
thought. It's
it's all
frustrating, right?
it's coming to a head because all of the pretending to recycle when it was really getting shipped to China and Indonesia or put in landfills, even Indonesia and China can't take anymore. Everyone's filled up. So now it's coming home to roost that, not doing this properly. And this is why people are now paying more attention and starting to take it more seriously, although it's the result really of a scam 30 years ago. So it's improving. Again, I'm always an optimist. Things are baby steps. It's always getting better. But yeah, we're a long way off on that.
Yeah.
But I'll also say on these corporate social responsibility reports, as someone who used to write them, look, the people who are involved in them are genuinely sincere, and I think companies are looking for, what are the things we should do, and often they come around asking. They go around to environmental consultants and they say, hey, look, we want to, improve. What can we do? What should we do? And they try to do it. And there are lots of great things happening right now with companies like doing these renewable energy deals and so on, trying to make sure that their products are being backed with, and building, sort of those sorts of things. And I agree. There's tons more that they can do, and it does look like greenwashing. There's tons of greenwashing happening, but I think there are a lot of sincere people trying to do good things, but it is surprising that those results came out like that. It does suggest maybe the marketing is continuing to lead.
Yeah. So I think one of the key takeaways from the report is he's saying businesses have to be more honest and transparent, and that's how you get customer loyalty. And I think that's a part of what you were talking about with CSR.
Yeah.
CSR, showing what your company is doing to help charities or your own staff,
Mm,
or reducing your impact on the environment. It's all really important to have that data out there
mm,
and let the customer see it. I mean, that's the first step.
yep,
Now, bringing back to our socks, I did some research on Family Mart. We're doing a giveaway. If anybody wants to enter our giveaway, you have
yeah.
5 more minutes to write socks in the comments and you'll put your name in. But I was researching Family Mart, and they are trying to get solar panels on more than 2,000 of their convenience stores around Japan.
Yeah.
They are trying to install electric vehicle chargers at their convenience stores.
Wow.
They are trying to do different things. And how did I find that out? It was a CSR report
There you
on
go.
their website. So it works, right?
And those CSR reports, again, particularly among top companies like Family Mart, like those get reviewed by the company president, and they become a stimulus for, hey, our CSR report sucks. All we're doing is, printing on both sides of the A4 paper, and we need better things. And then you'll get, and this becomes the company president says, how can I show my face at the next dinner party? What can we do? And it actually does stimulate. Then you go and hire environmental consultants, and they say, hey, you have all this real estate and all these great locations. Why not put EV car chargers in front of them? And they do the math, and yeah, it improves things. It increases accountability. Although, of course, yeah, they have to be accountable for making sure that what they're saying isn't greenwashing. But I think there's a lot of sincere people out there involved in trying to make things better in this sort of way. That is cool. I mean, this is why convenience stores are just so awesome. It's amazing that the model hasn't spread beyond Japan. Like, yeah, and this is partly why the socks. It's partly because, honestly, I mean, this is clever branding. Family Mart is just awesome, and so it's kind of fun to have their socks. Honestly, I would have trouble wanting to get like and what would be the equivalent in America? And would you buy their socks? Would you get a
No.
probably not,
I
right?
mean,
But in
and
Family Mart,
and
it's like,
this is
yeah,
another thing about convenience stores in Japan. They are a lifeline to a lot of small communities that do
oh
not
yeah,
have a supermarket, right?
yeah,
That they're much more than just a convenience store. I can't imagine a convenience store in America selling socks or underwear, but to be honest, it's useful and it's something people want and need.
yeah.
So yeah,
Deliver,
I'm
pick up
putting
parcels.
Atomic Tom,
Yep.
you're in there.
Say
Clark
socks, and you
Gunn,
can
you're
be in the
in
drawer.
there. Dude, Jericho, you're in there. Yeah, anybody else? Final minute before I pick some lucky people. PB not asking for the giveaway, okay? But
Hey,
what is
Abo,
unusual sock
remember the
material?
point about the socks, it's not about making sure they're recycled. It's reusing them and continuing to, use them for as long as possible. And when they
Yes.
can't be worn anymore, figuring out a clever way to reuse them after that. So,
Yes.
maybe armbands, maybe make them into a headband or something like that when you can't put them on your feet anymore. Just using them until they absolutely are falling apart, and then will naturally
Yeah.
decompose.
What's the longest you've used any item of clothing? I think
Oh,
I have socks from 20 years ago. Easy. I have clothes that I've worn for over 20 years. I mean, that's the idea. Use it as long as you can.
yeah.
If it's still good and you don't want to pass it on to a secondhand shop, buy
I
your
mean,
things from secondhand shops, maybe not socks or underwear, but other things.
yeah, 60 seconds is not long enough to talk about the scourge of fast fashion, but clothes, it's become this thing that they're so cheap, and that one, I love Uniqlo, but they're fostering this idea that you can just toss them out like after 6 months and buy more. And that's not good. It's not good behavior. So,
Yeah. Okay, it is time. It is time for the draw, for the giveaway. Now,
oh,
to make this collaborative, because it's Hiko and I,
yeah.
Hiko, I'm going to keep rummaging through the pieces of paper with the names on,
Mm.
and you say stop,
Okay.
and I will choose the paper that you say stop on.
Right. Okay.
Ready?
Ready. Stop.
Stop. First name is. What is that? I can't read my own writing. Sorry. Clark Gunn, 72. You have one.
Clank Gun, 72. I see.
Is it? There you go. There's the
There we
first
go. Better
winner.
not be a joke. It's not. You got socks.
No, you got to DM me with your address later and find out. All right. Let's do it again, Hiko.
Yeah. Ready. Stop.
Stop. My finger is on one. Here we go. Here we go. Jude. Jude.
Hey, Jude.
Hey, Jude. You have one.
You have
no,
socks.
my cat is about to go
Best
on the
Christmas
keyboard
ever.
and end it all. All right. Yeah. Best Christmas before Christmas. All right. We got one more winner.
Okay. One more.
Are you ready?
Yeah. Ready. Stop.
Okay. Atomic Tom.
Atomic Tom. There we go.
Lucky winner number 3. So
Wow.
we have
This is fun.
Atomic Tom, Jude, and Clark Gunn 72. So you guys get in touch with me, DM me your name and address, and I will send them out. Very
Nice.
exciting. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, this is very cool. That's a great idea for the show.
Yeah. Well,
Wonderful.
it's something very useful that I hope people will enjoy and wear with pride for a long time.
Yeah, no, very, very good. They won't be reused or recycled. They'll be new, but you should think you should use them environmentally responsibly.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Hiko. Great discussion as usual. Everybody have a great time over the weekend. It's now big weekend time. Hopefully you've got some plans. Hiko, you? Anything exciting?
I have no plans. I am living a quiet life, but I'm enjoying the lovely weather right now. I'll probably go for a run.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I was going to do some long walks. I'm going to try to hit my 21,000 steps for the Step Up Challenge sometime this weekend. If it's good weather. Looks like it might be, yeah?
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Take care. See you next time. Thanks, Hiko.
See ya.
Bye.